Hans Christian Andersen has written some dark stories, including The Little Mermaid. Spoiler, she dies and gets her tongue chopped off. But nothing really comes close to the horror of The Rose Elf, or The Elf of the Rose, depending on the translation from the Danish. So let's dive into this deliciously messed up tale. So the story calls the main character an elf, but from the description it's what most Americans anyway would consider a fairy, and not at all like this. This is just a generally misleading Goodreads cover. This is not a children's story. The elf is male. Such a wee thing no human eye could see him, so like microscope small. This book cover, again, pretty misleading, but it does say he was as well-formed and beautiful as a child could be, had wings that reached from his shoulders to his feet, and he lives inside a rose. One day he's out enjoying himself in the sunshine and flitting from flower to flower, but he stays out too late, and when it gets cold, the rose that he calls his home closes up, and he can't get inside once night falls. So he flies to this garden where there's an arbor with a bench and stuff, and there's honeysuckle that's growing on it. And so he's like, okay, I'll go inside the honeysuckle for the night. But there are two lovers on the bench. I said this story isn't for children, but it is written to be for children because it says they loved each other more than even the best child can love his father or mother. But they're sad because the girl's brother doesn't approve of their relationship and is the boss of the guy and is sending him on a business trip far away. So they kiss each other so fervently, and she gives him a rose, and she kisses it right before she gives it to him, and it opens up at her kiss. So the elf of the rose flies in and gets inside the rose. So the man puts the rose in his shirt, and it says that his heart was beating so hard and thumped so loudly the elf couldn't go to sleep. He goes on his journey, walking through the dark wood alone, and often takes the flower out and kisses it. Said the elf could feel through the leaf how hot the lips of the young man were, and the rose opened as if from the heat of the noonday sun. But then the brother of the maiden that dude's with, the one who doesn't like them being together for some reason, shows up with a sharp knife. It says, while the young man was kissing the rose, the brother stabbed him to death, then cut off his head and buried it with the body in the soft earth under a linden tree. The villain talks to himself. He's like, now since I was sending him on a journey, no one will suspect when he doesn't come back because he could have died on the sea or in the mountains. Then he heads home and he thinks he's alone, but he's not. The rose elf is there. He's in a rolled up linden leaf that had fallen on the man's head, like under the man's hat. And the rose elf shuddered with fright as he was brought to this man's home. So this dude goes home, sees his sister sleeping, and it says that he stopped over her and laughed hideously, as only fiends can laugh. But she doesn't wake up, and the leaf falls from his head onto the window pane next to the sleeping girl, and that's where the elf is now. So the elf crawls over to the girl and whispers in her ear what happened. Describes what happened, where the body's buried, and he says, you may think this is only a dream that I have told you, but you will find on your bed a withered leaf as proof. And she wakes up and she's like, that was a weird dream, but then she sees the leaf and she cries and just knows that it's true. And the rose elf, it says, could leave then and just go find another rose, but he decides to stay because he feels for her. There happens to be a rose bush in her window, and so he just lives in there and watches over her. Sometimes her brother would come in and see her, and she just pretends that everything's fine, and she doesn't know the truth, but she does. So one night she sneaks out and goes to where the body is buried and digs and finds it. It says, oh, how she wept and prayed she might also die. And she wants to take the whole body home with her, but she can't. So she takes the head. But first she kissed its cold lips and shook the mold out of its beautiful hair. So she wants to take the whole body home with her, but she can't. So she takes the head and she goes home and she gets a big flower pot, puts her dead lover's head inside it, puts on, potting soil and stuff so it's hidden underneath, and then plants a sprig of jasmine over it and sets it by her window and cries over her head pot. Now the elf that helped her know the truth and find him flies away, but then finds himself coming back day after day to watch her wasting away crying over this hidden head in her flower pot. So the shoot blooms and becomes this big jasmine bush, and the brother starts getting suspicious, why is she crying over this bush day and night? This is not healthy. He starts to think she's going crazy, and the author says he did not know whose closed eyes were there, nor what red lips were fading beneath the earth. One day, the elf finds her asleep with her head beside the pot, and so he comes in and whispers in her ear all of the beautiful things that she and her lover said to each other that night at the arbor. It says, "Sweetly she dreamed, and while she slept, her life passed away calmly, and then her spirit was with her lover in heaven." So she dies, and the jasmine opens its flowers, and the smell just comes blooming out. So she gets buried and stuff, but the wicked brother wants to keep the jasmine plant because it smells great and it's beautiful, so he keeps it in his room by his own bed after she's gone. So the elf goes to the jasmine plant and whispers in each flower the truth of what happened, and the spirit of the jasmine flower answers back. It's like, we know, or we have sprung from the lips and eyes of the murdered one. Well, the elf thinks they are not upset enough, and he wants to get justice. So he flies off and tells a bunch of bees the story of what happened. So the bees tell the queen, and the queen's like, you know what? We gotta go murder this guy. He needs to pay for what he did. The next morning, they get ready to go murder this dude, but they don't know that during the night, the jasmine plant has opened up and the spirits of the flowers have come out with poisonous barbs to get the guy in his sleep. As they whispered in his ears dreadful dreams and then stole across his tongue with poisonous barbs. Then they say to each other, now we have avenged the dead, and go back inside the flowers. So then our elf arrives with this army of bees. So they rush in, but he's already dead. And there's people around the bed like, what? He's dead? And the elf figures it out. So he tells the bees, like, don't worry, the jasmine flower took care of it. But the bees are still just filling up the room. And so they're like, maybe the people who are in the room are like, maybe it's the jasmine plant. So someone picks up the plant to get it out, to get the bees out, and accidentally drops it, and it shatters open and they see the decapitated head. It says everyone saw the whitened skull and they knew the man in the bed was the murderer. And the queen bee rose into the air and buzzed and hummed the sweet revenge of the flowers. The last line is that behind the smallest leaf dwells one, capitalized, who can discover evil deeds and punish them also. So look out. Even though it wasn't really the elf of the rose who did this, it was the jasmine flowers. But either way, you're gonna get found out by the smallest things that you don't expect to get justice. I like that. Now, Hans Christian Andersen wasn't the first one to come up with this head in a flower pot idea. Isabella, or the Pot of Basil, is a poem by John Keats. It's based on a story from Boccaccio's The Decameron. Now, in that Decameron story from the 1300s, the main girl's name is Isabella, and she's betrothed to this man who owns tons of olive trees, is a rich lord, but she's in love with this guy who works for her brother. His name is Lorenzo. And in this one, she has two brothers who, don't want her to be with him. So they kill Lorenzo, bury his body. But then Lorenzo's ghost comes to Isabella in her sleep instead of a whole rose elf thing and tells her about the murder. She goes and finds him, brings the body back, puts it in a pot that grows basil out of the pot, and wastes away miserable in front of the pot of basil with his head hidden inside. There's no cool bees or murderous flowers in this one, though. The brothers get suspicious about the pot, they steal it, they find the head, and then they run away not wanting to be found out, and then she dies of grief. That's just how it ends. Check out my book, which is a retelling of The 12 Dancing Princesses, a young adult romance, fantasy, ghost story as well, historical romance. It's called Dust Spells. And check out my podcast, Folk Tales and Fairy Lore. The link is in the bio.